Welcome to Pies Around the House. In this video I'm going to show you how to paint onto fresh plaster, also known as a mist coat. I'll show you what paint I recommend, I'll show you how to mix it with water in the correct ratios, I'll show you how to apply it to the wall, and I'll give you some tips and tricks along the way. When painting onto fresh plaster for the first time, the plaster will suck the moisture out of the paint extremely quickly. So we need to make sure we get the right texture paint to soak nicely into the fresh plaster. If we get this wrong, rather than actually adhere to the wall, the paint will tend to create more of a skin on the wall, which can be prone to peeling off at a later date. And the way we get around this is by thinning down the paint with water. So the first thing we need to know is what paint to use. Well, quite simply, you want a basic matte emulsion. As a general guide, I go for the value matte emulsions, and if you get a 10 litre tub for around £10 to £12 in UK money, then they're perfect. If you go for anything more expensive, then in my opinion, you're wasting your money. As an example, this is Crown White Matte Emulsion that I picked up on offer. I got this for £10 a tub, with my discount it was £9 a tub, and they're pretty much the same thing if you go to B&Q and get their value paint, or you get the Wix's trade paint, or some brands call them contractors matte emulsion. Always check the back of the tub just in case, as there are some paints that say they can't be watered down. So the next thing to consider is your ratio of water to paint. Now I always start with 40% water and 60% paint. If I find that the wall is sucking the paint up too quickly, then I sometimes add more water, but this is something you just have to gauge as you go along. Don't be afraid to mess around with your ratios to suit your particular wall. And what most people don't realise is that it actually tells you how to do this on the back of the tub. As it says there, if you're painting new plaster, seal the surface by adding a coat of paint diluted with up to 40% of clean water. Now just bear in mind, on the back of some paint tubs it will say mix with up to 10% water, some say up to 20% water, and personally I always start with about 40% water. If you find a ratio that works for you, then please let us all know in the comments section below. So we're going to need a few tools for this job. For mixing the paint, we're going to need a paint mixer or paddle mixer. We're going to need a drill to turn the paddle mixer. We need a bucket for our clean water. It's always a good idea to have a bucket with measuring marks on the side so we can work out the exact ratio of water to paint, and a paint scuttle for mixing and holding our paint. Now you can use a bucket to mix your paint if you want, in which case you're going to need 2 buckets, and you can pour it out from the bucket into your scuttle. However, to save on washing up, I'm going to mix it in the scuttle. Then to apply the paint to the wall, you're going to need a paintbrush. I've just got a pack of different sized brushes, and this is for cutting into the corners. You're going to need a basic paint roller and some compatible rolling sleeves to go over the top of the roller. And if you're painting a ceiling, then you may want to invest in an extendable pole that is compatible with your roller, so you can paint the ceiling while stood on the floor. And finally, a good quality sheet to cover the floor to stop paint getting all over the place. And as always, I'll put links to all the products and tools used in this video in the description section below. So I've given my bucket and scuttle a good clean to ensure there's no debris that's going to get into our paint. Then I put 2 litres of water in the bucket. I'm going to add that to 3 litres of paint. Personally, I always like to measure my water out in the bucket first, measure the paint out in the scuttle, and then add the water to the paint. And I've done this using the measuring scale on the side of the scuttle and the measuring scale on the side of my bucket. And just before I fill this with paint, so you can see that, there's like a ribbed section down both sides of the scuttle, and that's so you can roll your roller up and down through the paint to ensure it's got a good covering before applying it to the wall. And you'll see me do that in a minute. Now when you open your paint, it's also a good idea to give this a stir first, just to ensure it's well mixed before adding it to your scuttle. And you can use anything to do this, but just make sure it's clean and it doesn't have dust all over it, because you obviously don't want that in your paint. Now I'm just going to take my paintbrush, just paint that back into the pot, and then I'll set this piece of timber to one side so we don't get paint everywhere. And with any excess on your brush, if you just push it over the edge of your tub like that. So now I'm going to pour the paint up to the 3 litre mark in the scuttle. Just use your brush wipe off any excess off the tub like that. Now I'm going to add the 2 litres of water to the paint. Now so at this point I'd advise keeping your roller tray just to hold any brushes like that to keep paint off the floor. And the bucket we just used I've refilled with water, and I can now use this to clean my utensils and tools. Take your paddle mixer or your paint mixer and place it into the drill. And then on a nice slow setting, stir your paint. Once you've mixed your paint, you then want to put your paddle mixer in a bucket of water to give that a clean, and use the brush to get the paint off. So now we're going to take our roller and place the roller sleeve over the top by pushing it into place like that. Leave that to one side. First of all, I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to get some paint on the brush, and I'm going to cut into all the corners. When you do this, just do the paint into the corners, and your brush will probably leave a slight line. Then you can use the roller and just go over that gently until you remove the line and then carry on across the wall. And once you're happy that you've got paint into all the corners with your brush, we can now get paint on the roller and go over the rest of the wall. To do this, just lightly put some paint on the roller like that. Run it down these little ribs on the side of your scuttle and make sure you get paint right the way around the roller. Obviously at first it'll be a bit lopsided as the paint will stick to one side of the roller. Once it starts to get even coverage, you'll be able to do this, get a bit more paint and roll it round in a full circle. Now it's striking that balance. You don't want it dripping off so that you make a mess everywhere, but you want enough coverage that you're putting paint on the wall and not just sucking it back off into the roller. Once you're happy you've got paint all over the roller, we can apply it to the wall. The one thing to note is with the watered down paint, obviously you're going to get a bit of splashback, so you want to be a little bit careful when you're applying it. If you go a bit aggressively, it's going to end up everywhere. Now when you're using the roller, try to get a nice even coverage and apply an even pressure across the wall as you're using the roller. But you'll still notice that when you have quite a bit of paint on the roller and you first put it on, you'll get these little lines coming off the end of the roller. Just gently go back over those and try to smooth them out so you get even, consistent coverage of paint across the wall. And do exactly the same over the paint marks that we just did. If you use the roller like this and try to paint over the top, you'll get rid of those brush strokes and you'll get that nice even roller finish. Now when you're painting over the edge of rough plaster like that, it's a good idea to go over this with a hoover first. If you're not careful, you'll pick up bits of plaster on the roller and then you'll roll that into the rest of the paint, so be very careful when going over the edge like that. Now although what I'm saying now might seem a bit fussy for your first coat, if you don't sort this out now and you get a few little bumps and raises and drip marks, they will just get exaggerated with every coat that you put on. So by your third coat, they might be sticking out and they'll be quite noticeable. So best to nip them in the bud now, roller over it. Worst case scenario, if you find a few bumps after your first coat, just go over it lightly with a bit of sandpaper, give it a clean, and then when you go over with the next coat, hopefully the mark will be gone. And as I mentioned earlier, on this first coat it will absorb the paint quickly, so don't be afraid to get some more paint on the roller. If you try to go over too much with the roller without applying more paint to the roller, you'll find that you'll start to take the paint back off the wall as the roller wants to take the paint off the wall and absorb into the fur on the roller. Although I'm not doing this wall just yet, I went over it just with one width of a roller like that, and that's just to eliminate any drip marks or any brush lines or brush strokes that I left earlier. If you are trying to get in tight gaps like up there in the corner, you can just buy a smaller mini roller like that. If you have a look in your local DIY store or online, you'll find there's different size rollers and just choose whichever ones are suitable for your needs. So there we go, you can now see the difference between the plaster and the coat of paint that I've just put on the wall, and it's a really nice good base coat with good coverage. It's absorbed nicely into the plaster, and so that's ready for a second coat. So once your wall's painted, just leave it for a couple of hours to dry, and what I like to do is go back over it with a second coat of the same paint but without watering it down. Now don't forget, I'll put links to all the tools and products I use in the video in the description section below. If you find the video useful, then please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, press the bell icon for regular notifications. I've been Plaster around the house. Ta-ta, farewell.